Right now, the average American savings account pays you about 0.6% a year. Not 6% and not 5, just 0.6% for a whole year. Meanwhile, more than $7 trillion sits parked in American money market funds. People call that money safe, and in one very narrow sense, it truly is. The number on your screen never drops, so it always feels perfectly solid. But quietly, every single year, that money buys a little less of everything. A little less bread, a little less gas, and a little less of your time. You did everything right, you saved carefully, and you still somehow fell behind. Here is what almost nobody tells you about playing it completely safe. The problem was never really that you spent a little too much money. The real problem is what you were holding on to the entire time. Saving protects your money, but owning is the thing that actually grows it. Those two things are not the same, and that gap is the whole story today. Stay with me, because by the end this will feel almost obvious. So here is the question that should quietly keep you up at night. If your cash loses value each year, safe is secretly costing you plenty. Let us be honest, most people never actually run this simple little math. They skip it entirely, because the honest answer is genuinely uncomfortable. Back in 2024, inflation in the United States ran at about 2.9%. In 2025, it cooled a bit to 2.7%, but still climbed your costs. By the middle of 2026, it had already climbed back up to 3.5%. Your savings account, meanwhile, paid you all of 0.6%. Do that subtraction, and you lose real purchasing power every single year. Now, stretch that quiet loss out across 10 long years, and then 30. The saver who never invests does not simply sit there flat forever. They drift slowly, politely, and very predictably backward the whole time. The cruelest part is that the whole thing feels responsible the entire way. You are not being reckless at all. You are being punished for caution. That is the trap, and honestly, most people never even notice the walls. There is another quiet gap hiding underneath this whole story, too. For decades, paychecks have risen slower than homes and stocks have. So working harder for cash quietly loses ground to simply owning things. If your only tool is a paycheck, you are always paddling upstream. The good news is that the way out is simpler than you think. So stay with me all the way to the very end of this one. I am going to show you what ownership actually looks like in real life. We start with the easy, cheap stuff that almost anyone can buy today. Then we climb up a level to land, property, and real estate. Then we reach the thing the wealthy quietly hold instead of plain cash. The very last one ties every other piece together into a single idea. It comes down to one number, and it is honestly not what you expect. Once you truly see it, saving alone will never look the same again. So let us build this whole thing up carefully, one piece at a time. Let us start with the simplest form of ownership available to almost everyone. When you buy a share of stock, you own a real slice of a business. It is not a lottery ticket, it is a piece of something that produces. That business earns money, and as a part owner, some of it is yours. Think about that for a second before we go any further into it. Since 1926, the S&P 500 has returned roughly 10% every single year. That single figure spans nearly a full century of booms and brutal crashes. Wars, recessions, panics, and recoveries are already all baked into it. 10% nominal is the headline, but inflation quietly takes its own cut. After inflation, your real return still lands somewhere close to 7%. 7% may sound pretty modest next to some flashy overnight stock tip. But modest and repeated is exactly how almost all real fortunes get built. At 7% real, your money roughly doubles about every single decade. A saver stuck at 0.6% would need over a century just to double. Same dollars, the same exact person, but wildly different final destinations. The only real difference is that one of them owns and one merely saves. And you do not need to be rich or clever to start owning shares. A single low-cost index fund quietly buys you hundreds of businesses at once. You are no longer betting on one name, you own the whole market. Here is where the story finally stops being theory and turns very real. Fidelity tracks millions of completely ordinary retirement accounts every quarter. As of September 2025, a record 654,000 of them each held over $1 million. These are not founders or famous celebrities, they are just regular savers. Teachers, nurses, engineers and managers who simply kept quietly owning shares. Their average 401k balance came in at about $144,000. Not glamorous at all, but quietly climbing while idle cash simply sat still. So here is how those balances grew while cautious savers quietly stalled out. Part of the answer is a quiet, patient little force called dividends. Many solid businesses pay you cash simply for owning some of their shares. You do absolutely nothing, and small payments just arrive on a set schedule. From 1940 through 2025, dividends supplied about a third of all total return. One full third of the entire thing paid to you quietly while you slept. We will circle back to that third, because it hides something far bigger. For now, just notice what a low-cost index fund quietly asks of you. It asks for patience and small regular deposits, not brilliant timing. Add the same amount every month in good years and in scary ones. When prices drop, that same deposit quietly buys you even more shares. That is the calm trick the panic sellers almost always miss entirely. A tax-sheltered account like a 401k lets that growth compound untouched. Picture $200 a month growing quietly for 30 long years. At historical returns, that modest habit can cross well past $250,000. You never earned a huge salary, you simply let ownership do the heavy lifting. The saver with the same 200 stays almost flat the whole way. Same effort, same discipline, wildly different endings after 30 years. This is not about being smarter or luckier than the person beside you. It is about owning a small piece of something that grows and pays. A share, a fund, a rental, a business, they all follow one rule. They each take a little money and quietly turn it into more money. Cash in a jar can only do one small trick, and that is to wait. A fund, meanwhile, hires thousands of workers who never send you a bill. Buy the thing, hold the thing, and let the thing quietly work. The market will test your nerve with scary red days along the way. The owner who does nothing on those days usually wins the decade. Boring, steady ownership quietly beats clever, frantic trading over time. Now let us step off the screen entirely and out onto real solid land. Property is a kind of ownership you can literally walk around and stand inside. For most families, the home is quietly their very first real owned asset. According to the FHFA, U.S. home prices rose about 4.3% each year. That steady average runs from 1975 all the way through to 2025. 4% may honestly not sound like very much all on its own. But a house is almost always bought with mostly borrowed bank money. You put maybe 10% down, and the gains land on the whole price. Your appreciation quietly grows the entire home, not just your little deposit. That quiet leverage is what built countless middle-class fortunes over time. Every mortgage payment you make also buys back another sliver of ownership. Rent leaves your hands forever, but a payment slowly builds real equity. Property can also quietly earn you money while you sleep or travel. A rented room, a spare unit, or a whole house can pay you rent. Real estate also tends to quietly rise right along with inflation itself. Think about two ordinary neighbors living on the very same quiet street. One rents for a full 30 years, the other slowly owns the place outright. Same monthly check goes out, but only one of them ends up with an asset. Now let us be honest, real estate is slower and messier than tapping an app. Roofs leak, tenants call at midnight, and property taxes never take a holiday. But land does something that idle cash in a drawer can simply never do. It works for you, it pays rent, and it holds value while you live. That is why real estate makes up so much of everyday household wealth. Now maybe you cannot buy a whole building or house right now. You can still own a slice of real estate through a simple REIT. A REIT lets you own warehouses, apartments, and shops from your phone. By law, those trusts pass most of their rent straight back to owners. So even a small saver can quietly collect rent from real buildings. For most households, home equity is quietly their single biggest asset. Each payment and each price bump quietly grows that hidden net worth. It is forced saving that also happens to appreciate while you sleep. The renter pays down a landlord's mortgage instead of their own. 30 years later, one hand holds a deed and the other holds receipts. Neither path is wrong, but only one path quietly ends in ownership. Land also cannot be printed, unlike the dollars sitting in your account. That simple scarcity is a quiet, powerful shield against rising prices. When rents rise with inflation, the owner's income quietly rises too. The renter feels that same inflation only as a bigger bill each year. Same force, two opposite sides, decided entirely by who owns the door. Here is where the whole picture we have built finally snaps into sharp focus. The Federal Reserve actually studies exactly how rich families hold their wealth. Its 2022 survey breaks the very richest households down, piece by careful piece. For the top 1% of households, cash is almost a total afterthought. Only about 2% of their entire wealth actually sits in plain cash. Just 2% from the very people supposedly best at handling money. So where on earth does the other 98% actually live? Roughly 41% of it sits quietly in private business ownership. About 31% of it rides along inside stocks and public equities. Another 23% of it rests calmly in real estate and property, businesses, shares, and buildings. But almost never any large pile of cash. Think about that quiet gap for just one more long second here. You were taught to save your cash and to admire the wealthy from afar. Meanwhile, the actual wealthy quietly hold almost no plain cash at all. They keep just enough on hand to sleep, and they own everything else. The very richest lean hardest into owning entire businesses outright. A business is really just a machine that turns effort into steady cash. Now step down to the broader top 10% for just a moment. For them, real estate alone makes up around 59% of their wealth. Still ownership at heart, just a slightly different flavor of the same rule. It is not one thing, it is honestly just the same habit repeated. Own productive things and let your cash be a tool, never a home. And yet trillions of dollars still sit nervously waiting on the sidelines. Back in early 2025, money market funds hit a record $7 trillion. $7 trillion, and much of it is honestly just too scared to move. Some of that is smart, short-term money, patiently waiting for a reason. But plenty of it is really just plain fear quietly wearing a nice suit. There is one more quiet reason the wealthy love owning over saving. They rarely sell their best assets. They borrow gently against them instead. The asset keeps growing and paying while the cash goes to work. Cash sitting still earns nothing and slowly forgets how to grow. An owned asset works every hour, in every season, without a single break. That is the quiet, boring, unglamorous math behind almost every fortune. Notice the pattern hiding across all three of these different groups. More wealth always seems to mean more owning, and even less plain cash. Cash is where the wealthy pass through, never where they actually park. They treat dollars like seeds, not like trophies to admire on a shelf. Every idle dollar is quietly asking you what job it should go do. None of this requires you to already be wealthy before you begin. It only requires that you start acting like an owner, starting small. The habit matters far more than the size of your very first purchase. Saving alone quietly asks you to shrink your life down to fit the cash. Owning asks the cash to grow until it finally fits the life you want. That flip in the question changes absolutely everything downstream. Now let us be completely honest about the other side of all this. Owning assets is not some smooth, straight, painless ride quietly upward. Stocks can absolutely fall 30 or even 50% in a single bad year. Back in 2008, many people watched half their savings vanish on paper. Houses can sink too, as millions of families painfully learned that same year. Ownership without real patience can very quickly turn into a cruel trap. The panic seller locks in, the loss that the patient holder simply rides out. So real ownership quietly demands a steady stomach, a plan, and time. Never buy an asset with money you might genuinely need again next month. Keep a small cash cushion first and then let the rest of it work. The goal is never zero cash. The goal is simply not only cash. Owning is genuinely powerful, but only when you can actually wait it out. Diversify so no single bad bet can ever quietly sink your whole ship. Handled with patience, the risk becomes the price of the long climb. And doing nothing with cash is quietly its own kind of risk too. The safe choice and the smart choice are simply not the same thing. Owning is not gambling. It is patiently betting on human effort itself. Now, remember that quiet little third we deliberately set aside earlier. Dividends alone were about a third of the total return, all on their own. But here is the part that quietly changes how you see everything else. According to Hartford Funds, look at the S&P 500 all the way since 1960. About 85% of its total growth came from just one simple habit. Not the exciting price jumps, and not the loud headlines at all. It was reinvested dividends, quietly compounding year after patient year. Small payments fed right back in to quietly buy even more shares. Those brand new shares then went and paid their own small dividends, too. A slow snowball of ownership, rolling and growing almost entirely on its own. Think about that for a second, because it is the real hidden engine. The wealthy almost never chase the one enormous, dramatic, lucky win. They quietly buy things that pay small, repeated amounts on a schedule. Then they feed that little bit of cash straight into the very next asset. And they patiently stack those quiet little engines one on top of another. So here's the single line to carry out of this whole video today. Wealth is not one big win, it is small engines, stacked and fed. That is the entire secret quietly hiding under the boring word compounding. Saving just parks a single dollar and quietly hopes that it survives. Owning sends that same dollar out to work and brings some friends home. That single difference, repeated quietly for decades, is the entire game. You do not need a fortune to start this exact same engine today. You just need one owned thing and the patience to keep feeding it. The first small dividend feels almost insultingly tiny at the start, but that tiny coin is the very first turn of a lifelong wheel. Give it enough turns and the wheel starts spinning almost by itself. The early years feel slow and honestly a little bit discouraging. Then the curve quietly bends, and suddenly the growth does the talking. That bend is the moment saving could never once promise you. Saving asks how much you can set aside and quietly guard. Owning asks a far better question about how hard your money can work. Guarding a pile keeps it safe, but it never makes that pile grow. Putting it to work is a little scarier, and quietly far more powerful. Decades from now, you will not remember the scary days at all. You will only see the quiet engine you were brave enough to start. Picture two ordinary people who happen to start on the exact same day. Nadia buys one small share and quietly reinvests every single dividend. Theo keeps waiting for the one perfect, exciting, life-changing bet. Nadia adds a little more, reinvests again, and then mostly just waits. Theo jumps between hot tips and never lets a single thing actually grow. Years quietly pass without any single big dramatic moment along the way. One of them now owns a small private forest of paying assets. The other one is still waiting for the exciting win to finally arrive. The gap between them was never luck, and never a secret hidden talent. It was simply owning, then feeding it, and quietly refusing to ever stop. The number on Nadia's screen kept rising while her old cash stood still. Same start, same street, and yet completely different endings. Theo was not lazy and he was not foolish, he was just impatient. He kept pulling up the seed to check whether the roots had grown. Nadia simply let hers sit, and the roots quietly did their work. Time in the ground beat cleverness above it, every single season. The lesson was never about picking the one magical winning stock. It was about becoming an owner and then having the patience to stay one. Remember that quiet savings account paying you only 0.6%. It was never actually keeping you safe, it was quietly keeping you still. Share this with the one person still quietly waiting for the big win. If it helped you at all, give it a like and subscribe now. Then go start owning something today, even if it is very small.